It was the late fall, and I had the house to myself for the first time in months. My parents had gone to visit my grandparents for the weekend, so I had the entire place to myself. The house was quiet, almost eerily so. I was curled up on the couch watching a crime thriller, the kind that makes you jump at the smallest sounds. When I first heard it, a faint creak coming from somewhere upstairs. It sounded like a single deliberate step. Then, I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I muted the TV, and I strained to listen. The house was old, and it made noises all the time. But something about this sound was different. It was slow, like someone was trying to be careful not to be heard. I told myself that it was nothing, but then I felt like there was something in me that told me to go up the stairs and check for myself. I hoped that this would settle my nerves. As I reached the top of the stairs, I heard it again, this time coming from my bedroom. It was like someone shifting their weight, trying to stay quiet. My skin prickled, and I wanted to run back downstairs, but I couldn't just ignore it. My pulse was hammering in my ears, drowning out every rational thought. I took a slow step toward my bedroom door, which was slightly ajar. I peered in, seeing only the dim shadows cast by my bedside lamp. The room appeared to be empty, but something felt wrong. I took a deep breath, and then flicked on the light, hoping to scare off whatever fear had settled over me. At first, I saw nothing, but as I scanned the room, my gaze landed on the closet door. It was open, just an inch, something that I would never leave like that. A cold shiver then crept down my spine. I stared at that sliver of darkness, trying to will myself to move, to open it, and confirm that nothing was there. But just as I took a step forward, I caught a tiny but barely noticeable shift in the shadows within, like someone. A surge of dread then hit me, thickening my throat. Every nerve on my body screamed for me to get out and call for help. I backed out of the bedroom, keeping my eyes on that closet. My breathing was shallow. My legs felt heavy, but I forced myself to move, to get down the stairs and to grab my phone. Just as I reached the last step, a sudden crash echoed through the house. I could then hear rapid footsteps coming from upstairs, pounding in a way that matched the thunderous beat in my chest. I turned, horrified as the figure emerged from the top of the stairs, stumbling slightly, but regaining their balance fast. They were dressed in dark clothes. Their face was partially obscured, but I could see the glint of panic in their eyes as they spotted me. My hand shook, and I tried to call 911, but my fingers fumbled, and the numbers slipping beneath them. They were coming closer. Their footsteps were heavy. They were echoing through the hallway. Desperately, I lunged for the front door, after breaking out of my trance, yanking it open and darting outside into the cool night air. I sprinted to my neighbor's house, banging on the door with everything that I had. It felt like an eternity before the door finally opened. When my neighbors saw me, breathless and frantic, she did not hesitate. She pulled me inside and locked the door, and immediately called the police. I tried to explain what happened, but my words came out in broken gasp, and all that I could say was, "Someone is in my house." The police arrived faster than I'd ever seen them. 2 police officers went in with flashlights, while one stayed outside questioning me. I could barely concentrate on the questions. My mind was in 1,000 places. It had felt like hours, but really was probably only a few minutes, before the officers came back out. One of them was leading an intruder with handcuffs. They told me that they found him hiding under my bed. I'll never forget the way that he looked at me as I let him pass me. His face was twisted in frustration. And then he looked down. I felt a strange satisfaction watching him get taken away, knowing that he hadn't gotten what he wanted. The police then later told us that he had been watching houses in the neighborhood for weeks, looking for one left, unlocked, and easy to enter. They believed that he had planned to stay hidden in my closet till I fell asleep that night. This is from a friend of mine. His name is Jake, and he wanted me to share this story with you guys. So, this was Jake's first time living alone. He had just moved into a small third-floor apartment in a quiet older building. It was kind of the place with creaky floors and thin walls, and strange noises in the pipes. The place was not exactly high-end, but Jake was just a college student, so he could not be picky. He felt lucky to have found something affordable within the city, and he figured that he'd get used to the quirks. For the first few days, things were quiet and normal. He'd occasionally hear faint noises coming from his neighbors, thought nothing was out of the ordinary. On his fifth night, though, things started to get strange. Jake was laying around in bed around midnight, just about to fall asleep, when he then heard something from the apartment directly above him. It sounded like footsteps, slow, heavy ones, pacing back and forth. Jake just assumed that it was the neighbors upstairs moving around, but as he laid there, the pacing and walking didn't stop. It went on for hours, back and forth, as if someone was anxiously walking the length of their apartment. The footsteps finally stopped around 3 a.m., and he managed to get some sleep. The next morning, he casually mentioned the noise to the building manager, a man named Stan, when he saw him in the hallway. Stan's face immediately turned serious. "There's no one living in the apartment above you," he said, his voice slow. Jake blinked, a little thrown off. "Are you sure? I heard footsteps all night." Stan nodded, frowning. "That place has been empty for months now. The last tenants left in a hurry. If you ever hear anything like that again, let me know." Jake shrugged it off as some kind of mistake. Maybe Stan didn't realize that someone had moved in recently, or maybe it was just the sound of something carrying from a different unit. But that night, as he was laying in his bed, the footsteps returned. They were even louder this time, slow and deliberate, and they were right above him. He was listening closely, feeling a growing sense of uneasement. The steps seemed almost methodical, as if someone was pacing in a set pattern. After an hour of lying there in the dark, Jake could not take it anymore. He decided to go up the stairs and see for himself. He grabbed a flashlight, threw on some shoes, and walked up the narrow staircase to the 4th floor. The hallway was dimly lit, and as he approached the door to the empty apartment, he could see that it was padlocked shut. Footsteps. They were still there, right on the other side of the door. His heart pounded as he pressed his ear against the wood. It was unmistakable. Someone was moving around inside, but who could be in there if it had been locked from the outside? Suddenly, the footsteps stopped. Jake froze, his ear still pressed against the door, when he heard something that made his blood run cold. It was a faint whisper, so close. It was almost like someone was standing right behind the other side of the door. "Let me out." Jake stumbled back, nearly dropping his flashlight, and bolted down the stairs to his apartment. He then locked his door, feeling his pulse racing as he tried to convince himself that he hadn't heard what he had thought he just did. The next morning, he went back to Stan and told him everything. Stan looked even more uncomfortable than before. He finally admitted that the last tenants that left the unit left without warning, claiming that they had been harassed by someone who did not exist. Stan had assumed that they were either mistaken or trying to break their lease early, but hearing Jake describe the same thing, that was unsettling. Stan offered to go up with Jake and check out the apartment. They both went upstairs, and when they unlocked the door and stepped inside, Jake's stomach dropped. The place was nearly empty, except for a few strays of furniture and a thin layer of dust. But then, they noticed something else. In the middle of the living room floor was a small pile of objects: a pair of shoes, a half-empty water bottle, and an old notebook. Things that looked like they had been left in a hurry. Jake cautiously opened the notebook. Inside, scrawled out on almost every page, was that same phrase, written over and over: "Let me out." After that, Jake moved out of his apartment within the week. He never went back to that building, and he never found out what, if anything, had really been haunting the apartment above him. But sometimes late at night, he still thinks about those footsteps and that voice whispering from behind the locked door. I was home alone one Friday night, and my parents were out at a wedding. It was around 10:30 p.m. I was in the living room, halfway through a movie, when I first heard something that immediately put me on edge. A soft thud coming from the basement. At first, I tried to convince myself that it was a sound from the movie, but then noises kept coming. Small shuffling noises. It seemed as if someone was moving around down there. I muted the TV and sat perfectly still. I paused the TV on purpose to make sure that I was actually hearing this. And sure enough, there was a light scraping noise. And then there was this click, as if someone was touching the handle of the basement door. I started to feel that cold, creeping sense of fear roll into my stomach. I knew that I had locked the basement door earlier, but there was no mistaking it. Something or someone was down there. The handle jiggled, and my heart jumped. I grabbed my phone. At first I was hesitating for a second before I called my dad. He answered almost instantly, like he always does. But before I could even explain, I heard a click coming from down the hall. My blood ran cold. The basement door was slowly swinging open. I whispered to my dad what was happening, and he told me to stay on the line while he called the police. I didn't want to make any noise, so I moved as quietly as I could, creeping back toward the kitchen to grab a knife. The house was dead silent, except for the sound of my own breathing, and a faint creak of the basement door, still slowly opening wider. I was standing there, clutching on the knife, when I heard the faintest shuffle, followed by a slow, heavy sound of footsteps moving upstairs. I could see the edge of a shadow on the wall, getting closer and closer, as whoever or whatever was coming up from the basement. Just then, a knock on the front door shattered the silence. I went over, and I opened it and I found 2 police officers standing there, hands on their holsters. The officers went inside to search the basement. While I stayed outside, I was too scared to go back in. A few minutes later, one of them came back out and told me that they had not found anyone down there. However, the basement window was wide open, with muddy footprints leading inside. To this day, I still don't know who got into our house that night, or how long they have been in the basement, watching and waiting for me. But sometimes when I'm home alone, I swear that I could hear that soft creak of the basement door, slowly opening on its own.